Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into a scene that would make even the toughest among us rethink our worst days. Picture this. You're trudging through a frost-bitten medieval landscape, boots grinding against snow that's hardened into a crust. Each exhale forms a fleeting cloud in the biting air, and your shoulders sag under the weight of armor that's been soaking up the cold for hours. Your fingers, stiff in their worn leather gloves, fumble for warmth that just isn't there. Up ahead, the camp glimmers faintly. Torches flicker like distant stars, and the smoky scent of burning wood drifts toward you. You're mere moments from the one place a weary soldier could crash after a grueling day's march, the tent. But before we step inside, let's pause for a reality check. You'd need more than grit to survive a night like this. The human body wasn't built to endure hours of freezing cold wrapped only in coarse wool or thin linen. So, as we set the stage, if you're enjoying this deep dive into history, give the video a thumbs up and hit subscribe. It really helps keep this channel going. Also, drop a comment with your location and the time where you are. I love hearing where you're tuning in from. Now, let's lower the lights and slip into this medieval world. You reach the camp, and the faint glow of firelight feels like a whispered hope against the darkness. Medieval armies on the march hold tents along, but don't imagine sleek, modern camping gear. These were heavy, cumbersome sheets of canvas or linen, sometimes reinforced with leather patches, draped over rough wooden frames. You duck into the tent, stooping low to avoid the sagging roof, and a wave of smells hits you. Damp wool, lingering smoke, and the unwashed exhaustion of fellow soldiers. The ground beneath is a mix of frozen earth and sticky mud, depending on whether the day brought snow or a miserable drizzle. You ease down, armor creaking, and feel the chill of the floor seep through your cloak. Let's set the scene with some context. Medieval military campaigns didn't always pause for winter. Wars had a way of ignoring the seasons. Historical records, like those from the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, describe armies slogging through late autumn or even deep winter, with tents buckling under snow and ice. It wasn't just a European issue. Campaigns in regions like the Balkans or the Eurasian steppes faced howling winds that could shred poorly secured tents. For example, during the Ottoman campaigns in the 15th century, soldiers often battled sub-zero nights with little more than canvas and ingenuity. Here's a fascinating detail. Some soldiers discovered that the key to staying warm wasn't just the tent above, but the barrier below. They'd pile branches, straw, or even scavenged battlefield debris like broken shields or flattened crates to create a makeshift barrier against the frozen ground. Think of it as a medieval precursor to today's foam sleeping pads. Knights or their squires might carefully layer cut rushes for insulation, while common foot soldiers made do with whatever dry scraps they could scrounge, stuffing them under their cloaks for a sliver of comfort. Now, here's where things get interesting, and historians don't always agree. Just how effective were these tents at keeping soldiers alive through a brutal winter night? Some accounts paint a grim picture. Thin canvas let snow and wind slip through loose seams, drenching soldiers until they abandoned their tents to crowd around campfires. A 14th century chronicle from the Siege of Calais, 1346 to 1347, mentions soldiers struggling with soaked bedding and tents that offered little protection from sleet. Yet other sources suggest that a well-packed tent, layered with hides, cloaks, and tightly packed bodies, could trap enough heat to make a difference. Body heat from a dozen men crammed shoulder to shoulder could raise the temperature inside, offering a fighting chance against frostbite.
This debate, were tents flimsy symbols of shelter or surprisingly effective havens, continues to spark discussion among historians studying medieval logistics.
Inside the tent, you settle into the dim flicker of light seeping through the canvas. The wind outside howls, tugging at the walls and making the ropes hum with tension. The stakes, driven into the frozen earth, creak under the strain. A cold draft swirls across the floor, nipping at your legs, and you hear a comrade's deep, rattling cough, a reminder that disease could spread faster than warmth in these cramped quarters. Still, this tent is better than the open air. You stretch out, pulling your cloak tighter, using your stacked armor as a makeshift pillow despite its awkward bulk. The air carries the sharp tang of smoke from the fire outside, mingling with the musty dampness of the canvas and the faint prickle of straw beneath your cheek. Sleep feels elusive, like trying to coax a fire from damp wood. You shift, shiver, and tug the cloak closer, but the cold creeps in, relentless. Outside, a guard's voice cuts through the night, calling the hour. Another long, frigid night in the medieval camp is just getting started. As you lie there, blinking into the faint light, the tent feels like both your refuge and your adversary. A fragile shield against the elements, yet a constant reminder of how close you are to the mercy of the cold. The tent's walls barely reach above your head, sloping inward where snow has settled heavily on the canvas. Your breath hangs in the chilly, stagnant air, drifting upward to mingle with the dark smudges staining the fabric, marks left by countless fires or lanterns over months of campaign. You trace a hand along the canvas, its texture rough and slick with condensation, offering no modern comforts like waterproof coatings or sealed seams. It's just a thin barrier against the howling wind, fragile yet strangely reassuring, the only shield between you and the biting cold.
A key historical reality is that medieval tents weren't luxuries but necessities hauled across rugged terrain in long wagon trains. Each bundle of canvas, poles, and ropes could weigh upwards of 50 pounds, a logistical burden for any army. Nobles enjoyed larger, pavilion-style tents, often dyed in vivid colors or adorned with embroidered crests to flaunt their status. Think of the ornate shelters described in accounts of the Battle of Agincourt, 1415. Meanwhile, common foot soldiers squeezed into smaller, plainer tents, barely spacious enough for a handful of men to huddle together in the dark. The contrast was stark, yet even the humblest scrap of canvas felt like a lifeline when winter's grip tightened. Here's a peculiar detail. Soldiers often smeared animal fat or beeswax into the tent's seams, a desperate bid to keep out rain or snow. The trade-off, a faint oily stench clung to the fabric, blending with the ever-present smoke to create an aroma reminiscent of a tanner's workshop. It wasn't pleasant, but when a blizzard raged outside and water beaded off the canvas instead of soaking your bedding, that greasy smell was a small price to pay. Historical records, like those from the Crusades, mention soldiers using whatever was at hand, tallow, wax, even pine resin to weatherproof their shelters, a testament to their resourcefulness in the face of relentless elements. Yet historians still debate the true effectiveness of these tents over long, grueling campaigns. Some argue they were little more than morale boosters, a flimsy roof that gave the illusion of safety while cold and dampness invited illness. Pneumonia and dysentery were rampant in medieval camps, with chroniclers like Jean Froissart noting high death tolls from disease during winter sieges. Others counter that the communal huddling inside, men packed tightly, sharing body heat, created a microclimate that could keep the interior just warm enough to stave off hypothermia. Without precise data, thermometers weren't around until centuries later, we're left with vivid but unreliable accounts. Did soldiers truly rest in these conditions, or were chroniclers glossing over the grim reality? That question hangs in the air, much like the chill creeping up from the frozen ground.
You hunch lower, wrapping your cloak tighter, and survey the sparse interior. There's little to call furniture. A weathered wooden crate doubles as a stool for someone nearby, while a jumble of shields and spears is propped in the driest corner, exactly where you'd rather stretch out. The canvas flaps rhythmically as gusts batter it, and tiny drops of melted frost drip onto your gear, each one a cold reminder of the tent's limits. You curl inward, shoulders drawn tight, chasing warmth that feels just out of reach. The sounds around you are raw and close. One comrade's snoring rumbles thick and congested. Another mutters softly, maybe a prayer, maybe a complaint. A sharp hacking cough cuts through the dark, and your own stomach grumbles in response, a quiet echo in the cramped space. Beyond the canvas, the faint crackle of the campfire carries its smoky scent, weaving into every thread of your clothing. This tent is a sensory overload. Damp air clings to your skin, the coarse fabric prickles, and the constant murmur of breathing and shifting bodies fills the space. For a moment you close your eyes and consider how delicate this shelter really is. A stray ember from a nearby torch could set it ablaze in seconds. A fierce gust could tear the stakes from the ground, sending the whole structure tumbling into the night. Yet, in this fragile cocoon, surrounded by the low hum of weary men, you find a strange kind of survival, raw, imperfect, but enough. The tent, for all its flaws, is your bulwark against the vast, freezing darkness outside. You pull your cloak closer, its rough wool scraping your chin. It's not just clothing anymore. It's your bed, your blanket, your armor against the cold. Wool, heavy and slightly itchy, has a remarkable ability to hold warmth even when damp, a fact medieval soldiers leaned into heavily. Accounts from the Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1487, describe men wrapping themselves in their cloaks to sleep, especially on campaigns where extra bedding was a luxury they couldn't afford. You tuck the edges around your shoulders, cocooning yourself, and realize this single garment might be the thin line between rest and a sleepless, shivering night. As you settle back, the weight of the cloak feels like a small victory, a stubborn stand against the cold creeping in from every side.
Even the highest-ranking nobles, when dragged into the grind of extended campaigns, often abandoned luxuries like mattresses or fine linens, relying instead on the layered folds of their cloaks for bedding. This humble garment was a soldier's multi-tool, clothing during the day, a makeshift bedroll at night. Here's a curious fact. Some cloaks, worn and weathered through months of hard use, became so saturated with natural oils, sweat, and grime that they gained a surprising water-repellent quality, not unlike modern waxed coats. Soldiers would jest that their cloaks were so stiff they could stand upright in a corner, propped up by layers of spilled ale, mutton fat, and campfire soot. Gross? Absolutely. But when sleet or snowmelt slid off instead of soaking through, that grimy cloak became a lifesaver, a kind of accidental armor against the elements. If you're enjoying this glimpse into the gritty reality of medieval life, please hit the like button and subscribe. It keeps these stories coming. Also, drop your location and current time in the comments. It's always cool to know where you're watching from. Now, let's huddle closer to this frozen moment. Scholars remain split on just how much protection these cloaks offered against bone-chilling cold. Some argue that a thick woolen cloak, especially one woven tightly, could insulate nearly as well as a proper blanket, trapping body heat effectively. Chronicles from the Teutonic campaigns in the Baltic, 13th to 14th centuries, describe knights and foot soldiers alike bundling up in heavy cloaks to endure sub-zero nights. Others, however, point out that without additional insulation, like straw, furs, or even a raised platform, cloaks alone couldn't stop the icy ground from sapping body heat. A soldier lying on frozen earth might feel the cloak's warmth above, but still shiver from the cold creeping up below. Were cloaks a genuine defense against winter's bite, or just a desperate stopgap? The truth likely sits in the gray middle, shaped by the soldier's ingenuity and the knight's cruelty.
You shift on the hard ground, the cloak softening the bite of the uneven, frozen soil, though every joint still aches from the unyielding surface. Curling tighter, you tuck your knees to your chest, trapping warmth in the smallest possible space. Around you, your comrades do the same, their shapes blurring into indistinct mounds of wool. Each man a bundle of fabric, punctuated by the occasional cough or low murmur. The air inside the tent is heavy with dampness, and your breath condenses against the cloak's inner folds, leaving a clammy film. You press your face closer anyway, catching the faint, earthy scent of lanolin mixed with the ever-present tang of smoke. It's not comforting, but it's familiar, a makeshift home for the night. The tent is a patchwork of cloaks in muted hues, browns, grays, and faded blues, their edges frayed, hems caked with mud from long marches. Each cloak carries its own history, of battles survived, rivers forded, and storms weathered. They're not just garments, but chronicles woven into wool, however rank they smell. For a fleeting moment, wrapped in your own odorous cocoon, you feel a thread of connection to the countless soldiers who came before, each relying on their cloak to make it through another night. You roll to your side, clutching the fabric tightly, and bump into the man next to you. Space is scarce in this cramped tent, and privacy is a fantasy. The faint warmth radiating from your neighbor's body is a quiet reminder. Survival here demands closeness. A clear historical truth is that medieval soldiers often slept in tight clusters, pressed shoulder to shoulder, or even piled together, creating a collective furnace against the cold. Accounts from the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, describe men huddling in groups to endure frigid desert nights, while in the dense forests of northern Europe, entire units crammed into small tents, knowing a single body couldn't generate enough heat to survive.
This wasn't about camaraderie, but raw pragmatism. When firewood was sparse and blankets scarce, shared body heat was the best defense. A quirky detail? Some armies developed a tradition of nicknaming soldiers based on their sleeping quirks.
The loud snorer might be dubbed the bellows, while the restless kicker earned the mule. These names often followed men beyond the tent, a light-hearted way to cope with the shared misery of camp life. Froissart's chronicles hint at such humor, noting how soldiers found ways to laugh even in grim conditions. Yet historians debate whether this forced closeness built bonds or sparked tension. Did sleeping hip to hip forge brotherhood, or did the constant coughs, snores, and accidental elbows breed irritation? Likely both, depending on the men and the night. As you lie there, the steady rhythm of breathing and the rustle of wool against wool fill the tent. You edge closer to your neighbor, instinctively chasing the faint warmth he offers. In this freezing, fragile shelter, warmth is a shared currency, and survival means pooling every scrap of it you can. Historians remain divided whether this shoulder-to-shoulder existence forged unbreakable bonds or frayed nerves. Some argue that the shared ordeal of huddling for warmth created a deep trust, a brotherhood born of necessity. Chronicles from the Hundred Years' War, like those of Jean de Wavrin, describe soldiers who, after enduring such closeness, fought with fierce loyalty for their comrades. Others, however, suggest that constant proximity bred tension. Lice, foul odors, and accidental elbows could turn a tent into a pressure cooker of irritation. Medical records from medieval campaigns note outbreaks of skin infections and respiratory illnesses, likely worsened by cramped conditions. Did this closeness knit men together or grind them down? The truth likely shifts with each soldier's temperament and the length of the campaign.
As you shift in the dim tent, you feel the uneven warmth. Your side pressed against a comrade's cloak radiates heat, while your exposed back stiffens like ice against the draft. You roll clumsily, bumping into another body, and find yourself wedged between two men, their faint warmth seeping into your aching bones. It's awkward, even stifling, but your shivers begin to fade. The air is thick with the mingled stench of sweat, smoke, damp leather, and unwashed feet, a pungent trade-off for the precious heat that keeps the cold's sharp edge at bay. The tent hums with sounds. One man snores grate like a blacksmith's file, another coughs wetly into his sleeve, and a faint murmur, a prayer or a curse, floats through the dark. Somewhere nearby, a soft, almost delirious chuckle breaks the rhythm, as if one soldier finds the absurdity of this human pile too much to contain. You close your eyes, letting the chaotic symphony of survival lull you toward uneasy rest. Picture the scene from above, a tangle of cloaks and limbs, like a den of hibernating creatures, packed so tightly the canvas walls bulge outward. Outside, the wind tugs at the ropes, but inside you're cocooned by living walls of flesh and wool. Alone, you'd freeze. Together, you're a collective, breathing and shivering in uneasy unison. You press your forehead against the coarse weave of your neighbor's cloak, its warmth just enough to blunt the ache in your joints. This closeness, this shared heat, isn't just a tactic, it's the heartbeat of survival in a medieval camp. No one was meant to face the night's cold alone. Step outside the tent, and the fire draws you in. Its crackle and pop cut through the silence, a faint hiss rising as damp logs smolder. The flames hunker low, not roaring but nibbling at a meager pile of twigs, branches, and salvaged cart scraps, a precious resource in a camp where firewood is always in short supply. The embers glow red and orange, a pulsing heart surrounded by a cluster of tents, their canvas faintly lit by the fire's feeble reach. A clear historical fact: medieval armies depended on campfires, not just for cooking, but for survival itself during winter campaigns. Archaeological evidence, like the charred soil circles found at sites of 14th century encampments in France and the Low Countries, shows how fires were strategically placed to radiate warmth to nearby tents. Without them, the cold could kill faster than any enemy blade.
Here's a curious tidbit. Soldiers sometimes carried fire with them, quite literally. They'd scoop glowing embers into clay pots, iron vessels, or even repurposed helmets, banking them under ash to keep the spark alive for the next day's cap. Imagine clutching a smoldering pot warm against your chest, knowing it's your lifeline to tomorrow's warmth. No need to fumble with flint in the freezing dawn. Accounts from the Crusades describe soldiers passing these portable hearths like treasures, a flickering promise of survival on the move. But historians debate the risks. Canvas tents, often coated in greasy residues from smoke and makeshift waterproofing, were tinderboxes waiting for a stray spark. Some sources, like monastic chronicles from the 13th century, suggest commanders banned open flames inside tents, forcing reliance on body heat. Others argue that small braziers, carefully tended metal bowls of coals, were common, their faint warmth a gamble worth taking. Were these fires a widespread necessity or a reckless last resort? The records, like the smoke, drift without clear answers. You linger by the fire's edge, its glow a fragile defiance against the endless cold. The tent behind you, with its crowded warmth and rough cloaks, waits to pull you back. For now, you watch the embers pulse, knowing they're as vital as the men you share this night with, each a small, stubborn stand against the freezing dark. If this deep dive into medieval survival resonates with you, please give a thumbs up and subscribe, and let me know your location and time in the comments. Let's keep exploring these stories together. Beneath you lies a pelt, a rough animal hide spread out as a thin shield against the unrelenting cold of the ground. A clear historical truth. Across medieval Europe, soldiers relied heavily on animal skins for bedding. Sheep, goat, or deer hides were laid across tent floors to trap warmth and dull the bite of frozen earth. In wealthier armies, knights might sleep on luxurious furs, fox, wolf, or even rare beaver, softening the ground and holding heat like a status symbol.
Poor foot soldiers, meanwhile, made do with whatever scraps they could scavenge, often untanned and reeking of animal fat. Archaeological digs, like those at 15th century encampments in England and France, have uncovered brittle leather fragments, remnants of these vital bedding tools preserved by time. A grim but fascinating detail. During desperate campaigns, soldiers sometimes stripped hides from freshly slaughtered animals, laying down on pelts still warm with residual body heat. Picture curling up on a damp, faintly bloody hide, its musky scent overwhelming, yet knowing it might spare you from frostbite. Chroniclers, like those recording the Teutonic campaigns in Prussia, quipped that soldiers borrowed warmth from their supper, blurring the line between meal and mattress in a brutal bid for survival. Historians, however, debate how common pelts truly were. Some argue they were a luxury, reserved for knights and commanders who could afford furs, while common soldiers relied on straw or their cloaks. Others point to records, such as supply lists from the 1385 Scottish campaign,
which note sheepskins distributed to rank-and-file troops, suggesting hides were more widespread. Were pelts a standard issue, or a lucky found tied to nearby livestock? The evidence flickers like a dying flame, leaving us to piece together the truth. You press your palm against the hide beneath you, its coarse hairs pricking your skin, yet offering a faint, stubborn warmth. The ground's chill still seeps through, but it's dulled, less vicious. The pelt smells of earth, musk, and a hint of smoke from being dried too hastily over a fire. It's not comforting, but it grounds you. Around you, men shift in their sleep, cloaks rustling, bodies curling tighter. One soldier tugs his pelt closer, burrowing into it like an animal in its den. Another, without a hide, shivers audibly, his teeth chattering in the dark. You feel a pang of pity, but in this world, pity is a luxury you can't afford. You grip your scrap of hide like it's gold.
The tactile details are vivid, the greasy slickness of half-tanned leather, the faint scratch of fur against your cheek as you shift, the dampness creeping through where snowmelt sneaks under the tent's edge. Over days, the pelt stiffens, caked with dirt and sweat, yet you keep it close. There's no better option. Comfort is a fleeting dream. Survival is the only currency. Outside, the camp hums with the wind's low moan, the fire reduced to a faint glow of embers. The canvas trembles with each gust, and you close your eyes, cheek pressed to the pelt, wondering if its scent will cling to you by morning, or if you'll wake at all. For now, this rough remnant of an animal's life holds the cold at bay, and that's enough. You stir awake in the dead of night, your feet the first thing you notice. They throb, swollen and numb at the toes, a dull ache pulsing through them. Your boots are still on as they have been for days. Taking them off isn't an option. Not last night, not tonight. Frozen leather, stiff as oak, laces crusted with ice, and swollen feet that might never fit back inside. The risk is too great. A stark historical fact. Medieval soldiers often slept with their boots laced tight. Accounts from the Crusades and the 100 Years' War describe men keeping their boots on to guard against frostbite or sudden enemy attacks. Crude leather boots, often reinforced with hobnails, shielded feet from both the terrain and the night's cold. Removing them in freezing conditions could mean waking to frostbitten toes or boots frozen solid, unusable. Better to endure the stench and discomfort than lose the ability to march, or worse, lose toes to the cold's cruel bite.
Here's an intriguing insight. Troops often cram straw, moss, or scraps of wool into their footwear for extra padding against the chill, creating bulky shapes that creaked with every step and risked harboring moisture that could lead to decay. Yet this makeshift barrier captured just enough body heat to fend off the threat of frozen extremities. A few even advocated slathering the interiors with animal grease, turning the boots into a slick, oily haven that supposedly blocked out the frost. Envision forcing your feet into that sticky chaos and deeming it a victory over the elements. Odd as it sounds, in the grip of harsh weather, resourcefulness trumped any sense of refinement. Naturally, experts continue to debate the long-term viability of these habits. Some contend that non-stop boot-wearing exacerbated conditions akin to what later became known as immersion foot, swollen, blistered extremities ravaged by dampness and poor circulation, issues documented in medieval chronicles long before the trenches of later wars. For instance, during the 14th century campaigns in Scotland, soldiers endured wet, constricted feet that led to infections and numbness, mirroring the neurovascular damage from prolonged cold and moisture described in historical medical texts. Others propose that fighters mitigated this by alternating pairs, airing one set near the flames while using another, though such spares were probably a rarity for the lower ranks who couldn't afford extras. Did this endless encasement spell uniform hardship, or did it hit the common infantry hardest? The records are spotty, much like a roughly cured pelt. You flex your toes, urging sensation back into the numb tips, and sense the rigid leather pushing back unyieldingly. Your foot wraps, those sodden wool strips, are clammy and rigid from accumulated grime. A sharp, acidic odor rises, blending with the haze of campfire residue and the collective mustiness of weary men. But since the scent is universal, grumbles are few. You nudge your boots nearer to the dying embers, seeking to loosen the hide a touch. The warmth bites at your soles briefly before dissipating into the night air. Your comrades follow suit, their footwear clustered around the glow like tributes to an ancient deity. One gripes about a darkened heel, another swears at a throbbing blister on his instep, and a third jests he'd trade his boots for a steaming soak if fate ever allowed. You manage a quiet laugh, for what other response fits? These boots are cages, true, but they're also anchors. Strip them away, and you forfeit not just ease, but the means to trek, battle, and endure. Envision the audio of this moment. The groan of taut leather, the snap of frayed cords, the sighs as soldiers yank off their gear only to cram it back on shortly after. There's the mushy sound of soaked wool compressing, the sizzle when an over-eager soul edges too near the heat. The tent reeks of soggy hide, a biting aroma that infuses every cloak and strand of hair. It's far from agreeable, yet in this icy outpost, discomfort beats the hush of limbs lost to the freeze. You ease back, footwear still secured, digits squeezed like reluctant allies. The material bites into your shins, aggravating tender spots, but you endure it. The trade-off is clear: fleeting relief or another dawn's resilience. Your lids grow heavy, feet still bound, and it dawns on you why those long-ago warriors seldom shed their boots. They bore their endurance on their souls, stride after stride, through the shadows, until light returned. Your exhale clouds the confined, musty atmosphere, and you fumble for the vessel nearby, its contents shifting with a subtle gurgle full of anticipation. You lift it, and the fiery trail courses down, banishing the tremors momentarily. Whether it's ale, mead, or a rougher brew concocted nearby, the label hardly matters. In this frost, fighters dubbed it a remedy, and for those fleeting instants, it rings true. A key piece of history: spirits were commonplace in medieval outposts, distributed not merely for morale, but out of sheer need. Diluted wine, light ale, or any fermented option served as a safer alternative to tainted streams, warding off waterborne ills that plagued armies. During the 100 Years' War, for example, English forces rationed ale to troops, with chroniclers noting how it fortified the spirit amid winter sieges, helping numb the chill and coax rest in unforgiving conditions. If this vivid peek into the hardships of yesteryear's warriors is captivating you, please tap that like button and subscribe. It fuels more of these tales. Also, share your spot on the map and the hour there in the comments. It's intriguing to see where you're following along from. Now back to the glow of the fire. Here's a peculiar nugget. Certain fighters held that potent liquor could actually ward off frozen limbs, insisting it heated the veins from within. They'd daub alcohol onto exposed skin or drench their foot wrappings in brew before donning them, persuaded it formed an invisible guard.
Naturally, science tells us it offered no real barrier. Alcohol's vasodilating effects might even heighten heat loss, but the conviction provided its own solace. Envision stumbling toward your shelter with beer-saturated wrappings reeking like a spilled keg, yet convinced you'd emerge warmer come dawn. Accounts from 15th century Baltic expeditions hint at such rituals among Teutonic knights, blending superstition with the practical use of drink to endure sub-zero nights.
Scholars continue to grapple with the true impact of alcohol in medieval camps. Some argue it was a lifeline, bolstering spirits and staving off despair during grueling campaigns. Chronicles from the 1415 Agincourt campaign, for instance, describe English soldiers sharing watered-down wine to lift morale before battle, a small comfort in the face of relentless rain and cold. Others, however, highlight the risks. Drunkenness dulled reflexes, leaving camps exposed to ambushes or accidental fires. Records from the 13th century Albigensian crusade note incidents of sentries, sluggish from ale, failing to spot approaching raiders. Was alcohol a vital spark for endurance, or a veiled threat masquerading as warmth? The question lingers, unresolved, like embers fading in the night. You set the flask down, lips still stinging from the sharp bite of the brew, and exhale. A fleeting heat blooms in your chest, but your fingers remain stiff, your toes numb within their boots. Around you, others sip from their own flasks, the quiet glug breaking the stillness. One man hums a slurred tune, voice faltering. Another lets out a dry chuckle, wiping his mouth on a grimy sleeve. A third leans against the canvas, sighing as if the drink has softened the tent's rough edges. The air grows heavy with the yeasty, sour, sweet scent of ale, weaving into the ever-present smoke and sweat, coating cloaks and hair alike. It doesn't banish the cold entirely, but it weaves a fragile illusion of warmth, sometimes enough to coax uneasy sleep. Yet danger lurks in every gulp. Drink too much, and your senses dull, your body slumps, and the fire outside might gutter out unnoticed. A dozing guard, a spark misplaced, or an enemy creeping close. History is littered with tales of disaster fueled by liquor. The 1346 siege of Calais saw tents catch fire when drunken soldiers tipped braziers, a grim reminder of the thin line between solace and catastrophe. You lean back, the ale's faint buzz humming through you, blunting the cold's edge just enough to let your eyelids droop. It's a lie. Your body is still losing heat, but you cling to the fleeting comfort. Tucking the flask against your chest, you curl into your cloak and let sleep steal over you. The drink's promise, enough for now. You wake to an itch before the cold registers, a nagging tickle at your neck that you scratch half asleep. But it spreads, a crawling irritation across your scalp, a sharp nip behind your knee, a bite at your waist where fabric meets skin. You groan, raking your nails across your tunic, knowing the culprit all too well. Lice. A stark historical truth. Medieval soldiers were as inseparable from lice as they were from their cloaks or blades. Chronicles from the Crusades to the 30 Years' War describe armies so plagued that soldiers quipped their campmates were as loyal as kin. Unwashed clothes, scarce water, and the close quarters of tents created a paradise for pests. Excavations of 14th century campsites in France have uncovered louse combs, their fine teeth a testament to the constant battle against infestation. A grimly amusing detail. Some soldiers named their lice, turning misery into dark humor.
At the fire, a man might pluck a pest from his sleeve and dub it William the Fierce or Eleanor the Stubborn, a fleeting distraction from the relentless itching. In bored moments, some even staged louse races, betting on which critter would scuttle fastest across a warm shield. Desperation breeding bizarre pastimes. Yet historians debate the true toll of these infestations. Some dismiss lice as a bothersome but manageable nuisance, citing soldiers' resilience in enduring the bites. Others argue they were deadly vectors, spreading diseases like typhus that could ravage camps faster than combat. During the 15th century Hussite wars, typhus outbreaks, likely louse-borne, decimated armies, with chroniclers noting soldiers falling ill in droves after prolonged encampments. Were lice just itchy companions or silent executioners hiding in seams? The evidence itches for clarity. You shift on your cloak, fingers probing under your collar, feeling the tiny lumps where lice lurk. You pinch one, crushing it with a faint pop, and wipe your hand on the ground. Around you, others scratch and mutter, their curses blending with the rustle of cloaks, like rodents scurrying through straw. The tent already reeks of sweat and smoke, but now there's a faint metallic hint of blood from scratched skin. A bath is a distant dream. Fresh clothes are non-existent. You resign yourself to the irritation, knowing relief won't come tonight, and curl tighter into your cloak, the lice an unwelcome reminder that survival in this camp demands enduring more than just the cold.
You grit your teeth against the relentless crawling sensation, your skin twitching as lice skitter across it, denying you true rest. Picture the scene vividly. One man squirms on his pelt, cloak rustling, muttering as if battling an unseen enemy. Another lifts his tunic toward the fire's faint glow, eyes narrowed as he hunts for pale lice clinging like tiny burrs. A third shakes his woolen cap, a faint cloud of pests scattering like dust motes. It's revolting, yet utterly ordinary. No one even glances up from their scratching. You sigh, burrowing deeper into your cloak, knowing it only traps the vermin closer. Exhaustion triumphs over irritation, and your eyes drift shut, the itching fading into the camp's grim symphony, the creak of canvas, a neighbor's cough, the wind's low moan outside. In the medieval soldier's world, even parasites were woven into the fabric of survival. If this gritty dive into history grips you, please hit the like button and subscribe. And drop your location and current time in the comments. I love knowing where you're tuning in from. The scratching dulls, replaced by new sounds, hushed voices, muffled footsteps, the faint clink of armor in the dark. The camp never fully sleeps. Someone is always stirring, tending the fire, scanning the horizon for the glint of an enemy's torch or the shadow of a raider. This is the rhythm of guard rotation, a relentless pulse you're bound to, whether you like it or not. A clear historical fact: medieval armies split the night into watches, with men assigned to stay vigilant while others snatched fitful rest. The structure varied, 3 or 4 shifts, depending on the commander's rigor. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War, like those of Jean Froissart, describe the first watch and the dreaded last watch, when men were roused from shallow sleep to face the darkest, coldest hours before dawn. These rotations were critical. A lapse could leave a camp vulnerable to ambush, fires snuffed out, or soldiers slaughtered in their tents. Excavations of 14th-century campsites in France revealed defensive layouts,
with fire pits and tent clusters, suggesting careful planning to maintain vigilance.
A peculiar detail. Guards often carried wooden clappers, small horns, or even bells to ward off intruders or jolt themselves awake. Imagine pacing a frozen camp, boots crunching snow, banging sticks together like a lone minstrel to keep your eyes from drooping. Some hummed repetitive tunes, their breath steaming as they sang to fend off sleep's pull. Chroniclers of the Crusades note such watch songs as a common ritual. Yet historians debate the discipline of these watches. Some sources, like accounts from the 1386 Castilian campaign, describe harsh punishments, floggings or worse, for guards caught dozing. Others, particularly from smaller raids, suggest lax oversight, with sentries relying on barking dogs or sheer chance to sound alarms. Was guard duty a rigid lifeline or a shaky hope pinned on one man's wakefulness? The truth likely wavers between the two, shaped by the campaign's stakes. You picture yourself now, dragged from half-sleep, cloak draped over your shoulders as you stumble out into the night. The air hits like a blade, sharp and frigid, your breath billowing like smoke. The fire has dwindled to a faint pulse of embers, casting just enough light to make shadows flicker across the tents. You grip your spear, its metal icy, its wood colder, and begin a slow patrol along the camp's edge. The ground crackles under your boots, each step a battle against stiff knees and aching toes. You pause often, ears straining past the wind's groan and the distant snores from tents, alert for any sound that doesn't belong. A horse snorts nearby, stamping against the cold. Your eyes dart to the fire, checking its glow. If it fades too far, you'll need to add scarce wood, though the pile shrinks faster than anyone dares to say. The camp hums with its own nocturnal music, canvas flapping, men coughing in a ragged chorus, the fire's occasional pop sending sparks skyward. Beyond lies a vast silent darkness, heavy with the weight of the unknown. You keep moving, because to stop is to surrender to the cold, and in this world, stillness is death.
The silence beyond the camp is vast, heavy, making you feel small beneath the sprawling sky. You squint into the darkness, half expecting a glint of eyes, wolf or foe, staring back, though it's usually just shadows playing tricks. Your mind conjures threats in every flicker, every rustle. Circling back toward the tents, you catch murmurs, two men talking in their sleep, one whispering a woman's name, another cursing unseen enemies. Peering inside, you see cloaks shifting over restless bodies, a heap of weary souls relying on your vigilance to hold the night at bay. The responsibility weighs like damp wool. You stamp your boots, forcing blood into numb toes, reminding yourself that staying awake is your sole task now. Some nights drag like a rusted chain, counting stars, muttering prayers, or reciting half-forgotten verses to fend off sleep. Other nights, the cold itself is your ally, its bite snapping your eyes open each time they falter. You think of the countless soldiers before you, pacing through frost, cursing the dark, yearning for dawn. This ritual is timeless, etched into the bones of history. Finally, another soldier relieves you, his cloak pulled tight, eyes bleary. He nods silently, taking the spear as you mumble about the fire's state. Slipping back into the tent, the air feels almost warm compared to the icy slap outside, a faint, relative comfort. You curl into your spot, limbs stiff but grateful, wrapping your cloak tightly. As sleep creeps in, you realize guard duty isn't just about spotting enemies. It's about tending the fire,
keeping the camp's rhythm steady, holding fear at arm's length. Without it, the night would unravel into chaos. With it, the camp breathes, even as most sleep. You don't recall drifting off after your watch, but the voices linger in your half-dreams, soft yet raw with fatigue. To your left, a man hums a fragmented tune, its words lost, just a low vibration rippling through the canvas. Another mutters a prayer, the same phrase looping like a mantra, blending with the rhythm of your breath. It's an odd solace, knowing you're never truly alone in this tent, even in sleep. A clear historical fact: medieval soldiers often sang at night, not just for amusement, but to bolster spirits. Chronicles from the Crusades and French campaigns, like those of the 1346 Crécy expedition, describe men huddled around fires, chanting psalms or bawdy ballads to defy the cold and despair. These songs were armor against the dark, a reminder that voices could outlast the frost. A curious detail: some soldiers lulled themselves to sleep by reciting recipes aloud, a kind of edible lullaby. Picture lying on frozen ground, teeth chattering, hearing a tent-mate murmur about sizzling mutton or hearty barley stew, as if words could sate hunger. Chronicles from the 15th century Wars of the Roses mention such chatter, with men joking that naming dishes dulled their empty stomachs. It was absurd, yet it sparked laughter, briefly easing the ache of the night. Historians debate the purpose of this chatter. Some see it as deliberate bonding, forging camaraderie through shared tales and tunes. Accounts from the Teutonic campaigns describe soldiers strengthening ties through song. Others view it as nervous noise, a shield against the silence where death's shadow loomed. Was it unity or fear? The records hum with both possibilities. You shift in your cloak, the voices rising and falling around you. A guttural snore joins the mix, while another man whispers a love song, so faint it might be for himself alone. The fires crackle outside, the winds battering, the tent's fragile walls all fade as these voices weave a different warmth, not of the body, but of the mind, holding despair at bay. You close your eyes, letting the murmur of your comrades carry you into uneasy rest, their words a thin but vital thread binding the camp together through the long, cold night.
The tent hums with a restless pulse. Groans, faint laughter, muttered curses weaving into a rough tapestry of sound. To an outsider, it might seem like chaos, but to you, it's a lifeline. Each noise, every cough, every sigh proves life still flickers here, defying the cold's grip. You squeeze your eyes shut, letting the murmurs envelop you. A faint hymn drifts from one corner, its sacred notes blending oddly with a bawdy joke whispered in another, the holy and the crude coexisting without clash. It strikes you that countless soldiers before you heard this same chorus, snores, songs, prayers, and oaths mingling in smoky air across centuries. Picture it, men huddled under cloaks, faces half hidden, lips moving in unconscious rhythm. One traces the sign of the cross, another mumbles a ribald tale, a third hums through chapped lips. No one orchestrates this symphony. It rises unbidden, like sparks from the fire outside, flickering before fading to embers. As you drift toward sleep, lulled by this strange blend of sound, you grasp how medieval soldiers carved out space in the unbearable night. They couldn't banish the cold, but their voices wove a fragile net, strong enough to hold despair at bay until dawn. You jolt awake later, a dull clarity settling in. Your sleep has fractured. Earlier you sank into a heavy slumber after your watch, soothed by the fire's dying glow and the tent's murmurs. Now, hours later, You're wide awake, staring at the dim canvas above, the sounds of stirring men, coughs, shifts, and low voices filling the dark. It's an odd rhythm. Sleep cleaved in two. A clear historical fact. Medieval life often followed a pattern of segmented sleep, known as first sleep and second sleep. Scholars of pre-industrial Europe, like Roger Erkirch, note that people slept for a few hours, woke naturally around midnight, and spent an hour or two talking, praying, or tending fires before returning to rest. For soldiers in tents, this rhythm was less choice, more necessity, driven by cold, noise, and the demands of guard duty. Chronicles from the 15th century Wars of the Roses describe men rousing at midnight to check embers or share quiet words, their nights broken by the camp's relentless pulse.
A curious detail. Some soldiers claimed this midnight wakefulness was prime for storytelling, swapping eerie tales of ghosts or omens. Imagine lying in the smoky gloom, half awake, as a comrade whispers of spectral figures haunting battlefields or saints appearing in dreams to promise protection. During the Crusades, chroniclers like Fulcher of Chartres recorded soldiers recounting visions of glowing figures near campfires, perhaps divine, perhaps just smoke and exhaustion playing tricks. Historians debate whether segmented sleep was restorative or punishing. Some, citing natural circadian rhythms, argue it suited the body's cycles in a world lit only by fire. Others point to accounts of chronic fatigue like those from the 1346 Crécy campaign, suggesting soldiers woke unrested, drained by broken rest and relentless cold. Was this split sleep a practical adaptation or another burden on weary bodies? The truth remains elusive, much like the dawn, still hours away. You shift in your cloak, pulling it tighter, and listen to the tent's restless hum. A soft prayer in Latin spills from one man, its cadence soothing. Another groans, muttering about a dream to a half-listening neighbor. The man beside you sighs, whispering of warm bread and sizzling mutton, far from the stale crusts awaiting at dawn. Your stomach rumbles, conjuring the phantom feast. Outside, the fire's embers cast a faint glow through the tent seams, and a guard's boots crunch rhythmically in the snow, his spear tapping the ground. A horse whinnies softly, shaking frost from its mane. The world hangs in a fragile pause, caught between midnight's depth and the distant promise of morning. If this vivid journey into medieval survival resonates, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. And drop your location and time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're joining from. Let's keep exploring these raw, human stories together. In this liminal hour, the camp hovers between sleep and wakefulness, a fragile pause in the soldier's grueling routine. You pull your cloak over your head, blocking the draft, and sink into a half-dreaming haze. This is the time when guards drop, and men whisper truths they'd bury in daylight, confessions of homesickness, fears of death, or curses flung at commanders, enemies, or even the heavens for permitting such suffering. Words spill freely in this unguarded state, raw and unfiltered.
Picture the tent as a hive of quiet motion. Some slip out to trudge through snow for relief. Others prod the fire's embers, while a few swap tales that blur history and myth. The canvas glows faintly with the coal's light, shadows twisting as men shift. It's eerie, yet intimate, exhaustion mingling with a strange alertness, like a camp caught in a dream's grip. Gradually the rhythm shifts, voices hush, movements slow. Men burrow back into cloaks, hoods pulled tight, and snores creep in, one by one,
until the tent hums with the return of second sleep. Your eyelids sag, your body sinks into the earth, and though the cold gnaws, it can't outlast the tide of drowsiness. As you slip back into slumber, you realize medieval soldiers didn't just battle foes, they wrestled the night itself, its fractured rhythm, its relentless interruptions. Yet, like you, they found ways to close their eyes again, trusting second sleep to carry them to dawn. If this raw glimpse into their world resonates, please hit like and subscribe, and drop your location and time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're joining from. You wake again, not to lice or wind, but to the steady breathing of men packed close. In the dim firelight seeping through the tent seams, a stark truth hits. Not all bedding is equal. Across from you, a knight's retainer shifts, wrapped in thick wool layered with fur, while your rough canvas and goat-scented hide offer meager comfort. Rank doesn't fade in the dark. It sleeps soundly, swaddled in luxury, while you shiver. A clear historical fact: sleeping gear starkly divided the classes. Nobles and knights often enjoyed lined cloaks, feather-stuffed pallets, or blankets hauled by servants. Chronicles from the 1415 Agincourt campaign describe lords resting in embroidered pavilions, complete with rugs and cushions, a world apart from the common soldier's lot. Foot soldiers, by contrast, made do with their cloaks, a bit of straw, or a shared blanket, if lucky. Comfort was a privilege, not a right.
A quirky detail. Some knights insisted on bringing vibrant bedding, red, blue, or crested with family emblems, not just for warmth, but for show. Imagine trudging through frost, half dead from cold, only to glimpse a noble's tent aglow with silks, like a carnival amid the misery. Chronicles of the 1381 peasants' revolt mention rebels looting such finery, a testament to its ostentatious presence. Historians debate the true divide, though. Some argue knights' tents were veritable sanctuaries, insulated with layers of luxury, while foot soldiers scraped by. Others, citing records like those from the 1346 Crécy campaign, note that supply shortages often forced even nobles to improvise with rougher gear. Did rank consistently shield the elite, or did hardship level the field in grueling campaigns? The sources, often penned by the privileged, blur the truth. You glance at the retainer's fur, glinting in the firelight, and feel a pang of envy mixed with resignation. His bedding carries a faint herbal scent, perhaps from oils his servants applied to mask the musk, while your cloak reeks of smoke and damp. Around you, others tug their thinner cloaks tighter, some chattering teeth even in sleep. The tent's smells map the divide. Faint lavender or cedar for the fortunate, sour wool and earth for the rest. You curl tighter, the coarse hide beneath you a thin barrier against the cold, and let the camp's murmurs, snores, muttered dreams, lull you back toward sleep, the weight of inequality as heavy as the frost outside. The air in your tent is thick with the stench of sweat, grease, and stale ale, a sharp contrast to the faint herbal notes wafting from the night's furs. The divide isn't just in warmth, it saturates every sense: sight, smell, touch. As dawn nears, picture the camp. Nobles' pavilions rise tall, dyed in rich hues, their interiors padded with straw or furs, while the lean-tos of common soldiers sag nearby, patched and pitiful. It's a jarring scene, like a gaudy festival tent pitched beside a beggar's hovel.
Yet they both stand in the same mud, bound by war's grim equalizer. Still, the terms are never equal.
You roll over, tugging your cloak tighter, and remind yourself that survival doesn't hinge on softness. Comfort doesn't guarantee endurance. Sometimes the man with the thinnest blanket learns fastest how to huddle, how to hoard warmth, how to endure. Breathing in the sour, smoky air, you let the uneven cadence of your comrade's breathing wash over you, lulling you into a stubborn, shallow sleep. The night may dream in furs, but you dream in resilience, and tonight, that's enough. If this raw glimpse into medieval life resonates, please hit like and subscribe and share your location and time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. You wake again to the faint glow of embers outside, but something else catches your eye. A blackened clay pot by the tent's entrance, radiating a subtle warmth. Someone has brought coals inside, banked in a small brazier to fend off the chill. A clear historical fact. Soldiers often used makeshift heaters, clay pots or metal braziers filled with smoldering coals to warm their tents. Archaeological finds across Europe and the Near East, like those from 13th century Crusader camps, reveal scorched potsherds and metal fragments, traces of these vital contraptions. Chroniclers, such as Joinville in his accounts of the Seventh Crusade, describe vessels of fire carried into shelters, offering steady heat that cloaks and hides couldn't match. A quirky detail. Soldiers sometimes tossed herbs like rosemary or pine needles into the embers, not just for a faint, pleasant scent, but to repel biting insects. Imagine the irony, half frozen, scratching at lice, yet inhaling smoldering lavender as if in a healer's hut. Some even believed certain herbs like sage warded off malevolent spirits, turning the brazier into both heater and talisman. The air grew thick with a strange blend of smoke, sweat, and faint kitchen-like aromas, a battlefield apothecary.
Historians debate how common these braziers were. Some argue they were a privilege of rank, reserved for officers with access to crafted pots or metalwork, while common soldiers relied on body heat. Others point to widespread finds, like the numerous clay fragments in 14th century English campsites, suggesting even foot soldiers improvised with whatever they could scavenge. Were braziers a luxury or a desperate necessity born of clay and fire? The question smolders like the coals themselves. You edge closer to the pot, hands outstretched toward its faint warmth. It's not strong, but in the drafty tent, it feels like a small miracle. Your palms tingle, your face softens, and for a moment, the cold retreats. Others stir, their eyes catching the glow. One grumbles about the smoke stinging his throat. Another coughs sharply, yet no one moves the brazier. The risk of fumes is real, but so is the precious heat. Thin wisps of smoke curl toward the canvas roof, the air growing hazy. You cough lightly, pulling your cloak over your nose, but you stay close, drawn to the warmth's promise, despite the sting in your eyes. Comfort here always demands a cost. Picture the tent. Cloaks draped over hunched shoulders, men crouched around the brazier like pilgrims at a shrine. The coals cast a red glow, illuminating faces from below, shadows twisting across the canvas. It's both sacred and perilous. Life in the embers, death in a stray spark. You wonder if you'll wake with a raw throat or pounding head from the fumes, but you know you'll wake alive, and that outweighs all else. Lying back, cloak pulled tight, you feel the brazier's uneven warmth ripple across the tent, not enough to banish the cold, but enough to dull its bite. You close your eyes, the faint crackle of coals mingling with the snores and murmurs, and drift toward sleep,
trusting this fragile heat to carry you to dawn.
The brazier's coals glow steadily by the tent's entrance, both protector and peril, a fragile balance of warmth and danger. As your eyelids droop, you grasp the paradox of medieval survival. Every comfort, fire, ale, furs, or coals, casts a shadow of risk. Nothing is safe without a cost. You wake again, every joint aching, your body weighed down not just by cold, but by the layers you never shed. Beside you lies your quilted gambeson, the padded armor worn beneath steel, now wadded into a makeshift mattress against the frozen earth. A clear historical fact: soldiers often repurposed their gambesons as bedding. More than battlefield protection, these thick, quilted garments, stuffed with linen or wool and sometimes weighing up to 20 pounds, doubled as blankets or cushions. Chronicles from the 14th century Hundred Years' War describe knights using gambesons as mattresses and even propping helmets under their heads as crude pillows, turning tools of war into fleeting comforts. A quirky detail: soldiers quipped that a gambeson was warmer dead than alive. On the march, it trapped sweat, turning into a stifling furnace, but spread flat at night, it offered surprising insulation. Some swore it outshone featherbeds back home, though that might have been desperation speaking. Historians debate the gambeson's true value as bedding. Some argue its dense layers provided real protection against frost and damp, with accounts from the 1385 Scottish campaign noting soldiers surviving sub-zero nights thanks to such padding. Others countered that sweat-soaked, stiffened gambesons were little better than damp rags, offering scant relief beyond a barrier against mud. Was the gambeson a nighttime savior or just another sodden burden? The sources, like patched fabric, leave gaps in the answer. You settle back, feeling the uneven quilting beneath your spine, lumpy in places, sagging in others, yet a paradise compared to bare ground. The cold still seeps up, but your bones no longer grind against frost. Your cloak, pulled tight, carries the sour musk of sweat and endurance, a scent as human as it is harsh. Around you, others mirror your makeshift bed. One man drapes his gambeson over himself like a blanket, another lies atop his breastplate as if it were a cot, and a young soldier clutches his helmet like a cold, unyielding child. The tent hums with the faint clink of armor shifting, a rusty symphony. The air is thick with wool, sweat, and iron, an odor that's grim but familiar, fading into the background like a grim lullaby.
Picture the scene. Gambesons spread like tattered quilts, their seams frayed from battle, stuffing poking out like sparse whiskers. Cloaks pile atop them, forming uneven mounds, while helmets glint faintly, some serving as pillows, others stacked in corners. The tent is a jumble of war gear reborn as furniture, a stark reminder that tools meant for violence, swords, armor, helmets, become sacred at night, standing between you and the earth's icy bite. You close your eyes, imagining the coarse fabric as feathers, willing softness into the scratchy layers. Your hands rest on your chest, and you drift into a shallow, uneasy sleep, grateful for a comfort that's more survival than luxury. You wake with a jolt, nose wrinkling before your eyes open. It's not the cold, but the smell. It's a living, breathing beast born of nights steeped in smoke, sweat, and damp wool. A tent crammed with unwashed men is never gentle on the senses, but after days of this, the odor grows into something almost tangible, a heavy presence that lingers like an unwelcome guest. If this vivid journey into medieval survival resonates, please hit like and subscribe, and drop your location and time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're joining from. Let's keep exploring these raw human stories together. You draw a cautious breath, and the stench clings to your lungs, a sharp mix of smoke from smoldering logs, sour sweat baked into cloaks, the wet dog reek of damp wool, and a faint,
acrid undertone of scorched stew, as if someone let the pot boil dry. A clear historical fact, medieval camps were notorious for their odor, often noted in chronicles before tales of valor or hardship. Fires burned incessantly, coating canvas and clothing in a bitter haze. Tents trapped moisture, turning wool and linen into mildewed sponges. With bathing a rare luxury on campaign, soldiers might go weeks without a proper wash. The phrase camp smell needed no elaboration. A peculiar detail: some commanders ordered herbs like lavender, rosemary, or thyme strewn across tent floors to dull the stench. Soldiers trampled these underfoot, hoping for a fleeting whiff of freshness. Imagine lying on straw, laced with rosemary, its sharp scent briefly cutting through before surrendering to the overpowering musk of sweat and smoke. In some regions, men wore small pouches of dried herbs around their necks, less for refinement and more to breathe anything but the camp's foul air, as noted in accounts from 15th-century Burgundian campaigns.
Historians debate the stench's true impact. Some argue soldiers grew nose-blind to it, desensitized after weeks in the miasma, with chroniclers like Jean de Wavrin suggesting men barely noticed the reek. Others contend it was a health hazard, attracting flies and fouling air, potentially worsening disease outbreaks like dysentery, which plagued camps like those during the 1346 siege of Calais. Was the smell a mere nuisance or a subtle killer? The records offer vivid complaints, but no clear verdict. You shift, pulling your cloak closer, and the odor intensifies, wool heavy with sweat and smoke scraping your cheek. Your throat, raw from the stale air, triggers a soft cough. Around you, men stir, their voices hoarse. One sneezes, rattling the tent flap. Another curses the reek, though change is impossible. The smells layer like a grim fog, bitter smoke coating your tongue, oily sweat stinging your nostrils, damp wool carrying an animal musk, a reminder it once clad a living creature. Nearby, leather boots add their own rank note, half scorched, half rotting. Over it all lingers the charred ghost of last night's stew, beans fused to the pot's bottom. You roll over, seeking a cleaner fold in your cloak, but escape is futile. The air presses against you, thick and heavy. Even your dreams carry the tang of smoke, memories of home, fresh rushes on floors, sheets washed in clear rivers sting sharper than the stench. Picture the tent. Cloaks hang stiffly from pegs, crusted with grime, helmets streaked with soot, gambesons steaming faintly, releasing waves of damp wool odor. Men shift, scratching and coughing, their sour breath blending into the haze. The canvas itself holds the smell, soaked with months of smoke, exhaling a bitter aroma when warmed by the fire. Yet, oddly, this stench is part of survival's rhythm. It signals life, breathing, sweating comrades sharing this cramped refuge. Silence and clean air would mean an empty tent, a worse fate. You breathe again, coughing, letting the foulness settle like another layer of armor. In the medieval camp, survival meant enduring not just enemies, but sensations. Cold, smoke, damp, itch, and smell, all proof of persistence over comfort.
Half asleep, you hear it, a soft patter, like fingers tapping canvas. Then a chill seeps through the seams, rain or snow finding every gap, dripping onto weary faces. The tent, once a fragile haven, turns traitor, channeling the storm inside. If this vivid journey into medieval hardship resonates, please hit like and subscribe, and share your location and time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're joining from. Let's keep exploring these raw stories together. You roll over, and icy drops splash your cheek, jolting you upright. Medieval tents, as surviving accounts reveal, were notoriously permeable. Heavy canvas or linen offered some shelter, but once rain or snow soaked through, the fabric sagged and wept. Chronicles from the 14th century campaigns in Flanders describe soldiers waking in puddles, cloaks drenched, straw bedding reduced to sodden mush overnight. During the 1347 siege of Calais, some troops abandoned leaking tents entirely, huddling by fires rather than enduring dripping canvas. A curious custom emerges in the records. Soldiers smeared tents with animal fat or tar to repel water. The result was imperfect. Rain still crept in, but the greasy canvas, reeking of rancid lard, left hands and cloaks slick. Imagine ducking into a tent, only to brush against sticky walls that smelled like a slaughterhouse, a faint shield against the wet, but a new assault on the senses. Historians differ on how soldiers coped with relentless downpours. Some suggest organized efforts, like rotating men to gather fresh straw to replace waterlogged bedding, as noted in accounts from the Hundred Years' War. Others argue endurance was the only strategy. Men slept wet, woke shivering, and marched in sodden gear, their resilience their only defense.
Was there a system to stay dry, or was it sheer stubbornness? The sources, like the tents themselves, leak contradictions, offering no clear resolution. You curl tighter under your cloak, its damp wool clinging clammily to your skin, still holding a whisper of warmth. The ground beneath is now a mire, oozing up as if the earth means to swallow you. Around you, men curse, shift bedding, and stuff cloaks against leaks. One groans as drops drum his forehead, too weary to move. The tent stench deepens. Wet wool carries a sour barnyard reek. Soaked leather turns sharp and pungent, and smoke from the hissing fire outside weaves a heavy fog that weighs on your lungs. You cough, your neighbor echoes, each breath a pale puff in the dark. Picture it, sagging canvas streaked with rivulets, straw mats sinking into sludge, cloaks wrapped like cocoons around shivering forms. The fire outside spits steam as rain hits embers, a futile protest against the storm. The night pulses with the steady drip, 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 a rhythm that invades every dream. Yet in this shared misery, a strange unity emerges. Men who grumbled moments ago now share grim chuckles. One jests he'll sprout gills by dawn. Another calls the dripping water a holy baptism for unspoken sins. The weak laughter ripples through the tent, a fleeting blanket, warmer than any sodden cloak. You pull your cloak tighter, knowing the storm won't yield to wishes. The wet will linger, boots will squelch, bedding will reek, and armor will weigh heavier come morning. But you'll rise, stiff and miserable, to march through the mud. This refusal to break, more than dryness or warmth, is your true shield against the cold's killing grip.
As the rain fades to silence, a new sound emerges, a faint clinking, like charms brushing together. Lifting your head, you spot shapes dangling from the tent poles, small pouches, wooden crosses, bones tied with twine. These aren't mere trinkets, but defenses born of belief. Chronicles, like those from the Crusades, reveal how superstition permeated medieval soldiering, especially at night. Men pinned amulets inside cloaks, hung charms on ropes, or carved symbols into poles to ward off evil while they slept vulnerable. Some clutched saint medals or tiny relics, splinters claimed to be from holy shrines, as faith and survival blurred in the smoky dark. A stranger habit surfaces in Eastern European accounts. Soldiers tied animal skulls, often fox or hare, to tent frames, believing they repelled frost demons or restless spirits, as recorded in 15th century Polish campaign logs. These talismans, blending Christian and folk beliefs, were as vital to some as their cloaks, a fragile armor against the unseen. If this vivid journey into medieval survival resonates, please hit like and subscribe, and drop your location and time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're joining from. Some soldiers sprinkled what they believed to be holy water, or whatever passed for it, around the tent's edges, as if drawing an invisible barrier against the night's threats. Picture a weary man fumbling with a flask, splashing a few drops onto the muddy ground, murmuring prayers half-remembered from childhood. It's less about certainty and more about solace, a ritual to anchor the soul in the dark. Scholars debate whether these acts were rooted in deep faith or mere superstition. Some, citing crusade chronicles like those of Fulcher of Chartres, argue they reflected genuine devotion, extensions of the same piety that drove men to holy wars. Others, referencing folk practices in 15th century Eastern European campaigns, see them as primal reflexes, gestures to tame fear, not unlike knocking on wood.
Around you, men murmur in half-sleep, prayers tangling with curses. One soldier crosses himself, chanting saints' names. Another rubs a worn wooden token, smoothed by habit. A third snores, too exhausted or indifferent to join the rituals. The tent becomes a makeshift chapel, its congregation sprawled on damp pelts, its hymns whispered, its relics cobbled from scraps. The air carries the faint sweetness of crushed lavender or thyme from charms, briefly cutting through the wet wool's musk, almost like a hearth at home. A draft sweeps in, shattering the illusion, but you cling to it. Picture the scene. Canvas aglow with the brazier's coals, charms swaying, crosses glinting, soldiers' faces smeared with soot and sweat, darting toward their talismans as if to ensure they still hold. Outside, the wind rattles ropes, but inside, belief weaves a fragile thread between men. You close your eyes, fingers brushing the knotted cloth. It may do nothing, hold no power, but belief itself is a shield, and in this hostile night, even superstition feels like armor. You breathe deeply, clutching that thought, and slip into uneasy rest, guarded by faith. Yours or another's, it doesn't matter. You wake to warmth against your side, not a soldier's bulk, but something softer, furrier. Turning, you find a camp dog curled tight against you, nose tucked into its tail, breath huffing softly. It snuck in during the night, choosing your corner for refuge. For a moment, the cold fades, replaced by the steady pulse of its small body. Chronicles, like those from the 14th century Hundred Years' War, note that animals roamed medieval camps freely, with dogs as constant companions. They scavenged scraps, guarded supplies, and trailed soldiers like loyal shadows. In freezing nights, they weren't shooed away, but welcomed as living heaters. A quirky detail: soldiers often gave dogs honorary roles, naming them mascots or guardians. A 15th century Burgundian chronicle describes a mutt dubbed Captain, who slept in the commander's tent and barked to warn of enemy scouts. During the 1346 Cressy campaign, dogs were reportedly wrapped in spare cloaks, their warmth as valued as their loyalty.
Historians debate how widespread this bond was. Some, citing frequent mentions in records, argue dogs were ubiquitous, vital companions to lonely soldiers. Others suggest only certain camps, with ample food or tolerant commanders, fostered such closeness. Either way, this dog's heat is a quiet gift, a reminder that survival leans on every ally, even one with paws.
The debate over the camp dog's role persists among historians. Some see them as cherished allies, their warmth and loyalty a balm for soldiers' hardships, with chronicles like those from the 15th century Burgundian campaigns describing dogs as near constant companions, guarding supplies and sharing body heat. Others argue they were more burden than boon, spreading fleas and pilfering scarce food, as noted in complaints from the 1346 Crecy campaign, where soldiers grumbled about strays disrupting rations. Was the dog a comrade or a pest? The truth lies buried in the mud of history. You stroke the dog's coarse fur, smoky and flecked with meat scraps, its warmth a quiet gift. Its heartbeat thumps steadily, faster than yours, a soft drum against your side. The dog sighs, pressing closer, as if aware of the unspoken deal, heat for shelter. Around you, men take notice. One grumbles, jealous, calling the dog the camp's best blanket. Another chuckles, dubbing it wiser than any soldier. A third tosses a bread scrap, which the dog snaps up without stirring. In this dim tent, the dog becomes more than a stray. It's a bridge, sparking shared amusement among weary men. Its musky scent blends with the wool, softening the bite of sweat and smoke. For a fleeting moment, you imagine a village hearth, a life where warmth isn't scavenged. Picture it. The dog curled tight, soldiers hunched under cloaks, all bound in a fragile cocoon of shared heat. The canvas ripples in the wind, but the dog's presence anchors the group, a small proof that not all in war is grim. You close your eyes, hand on its flank, its steady breaths seeping warmth into your bones. It's no miracle, just shared heat. But in this freezing campaign, it feels divine. Your breathing syncs with the dog's, and you slip into a deeper sleep, as if survival tonight arrived with a wagging tail. You wake not to cold or itch, but to an unnerving silence. The dog has shifted away, the fire outside reduced to embers, and the tent's usual chorus, snores, mutters, coughs, has vanished.
The canvas snaps as wind tugs the ropes, but no voices rise. You realize the commanders have ordered quiet. A heavy, deliberate hush. Military ordinances, like those from the 14th century English campaigns, revealed that silence was a survival tactic, enforced to hide camps from enemy scouts. A noisy camp might comfort its men, but could betray their position, as noted in records from the 100 Years' War, where commanders stressed stealth near enemy lines. A quirky detail: some armies used whispered codes, tongue clicks, shield taps, or soft hisses to signal without breaking the hush. Imagine lying awake, hearing a faint tap-tap for all clear, or a hiss warning of danger, a disciplined lullaby of vigilance. Historians debate how strictly this silence was enforced. Some, citing accounts of harsh punishments like floggings for loud talkers, argue it was ironclad, especially in tense campaigns. Others, referencing smaller raids where soldiers sang despite orders, suggest the rule was often ignored when danger felt distant. Was silence a universal mandate or a scribe's ideal? It likely varied by commander and context.
The tent feels eerie without its familiar hum. No snores, no prayers, no murmured tales. Just the wind's low moan and the faint clink of charms on the poles. You lie still, the absence of sound pressing like a weight, and realize this hush is its own kind of armor, shielding the camp from unseen threats. Yet it's suffocating, amplifying the cold and the dark. You pull your cloak tighter, the dog's warmth of fading memory, and wait for the next tap-tap, hoping it signals safety as you drift back toward uneasy rest. In the oppressive silence, your heartbeat thunders in your ears. The camp dog stirs, its tail brushing the ground, a faint sound that feels like a shout in the stillness. You shift cautiously, but the cloak's rustle scrapes like metal on stone, amplified by the hush. Men breathe shallowly, as if afraid to disturb the air, their eyes likely open in the dark, bound by an unspoken pact. It's an odd intimacy, stripped of words, rooted in shared restraint.
Without voices, smells take over. Lingering smoke, sharp and heavy. Damp wool, earthy and sour. Leather's pungent tang. The tent itself seems to exhale these odors, reminding you that silence can't erase discomfort. Picture the camp from above, dark tents clustered like graves, no songs or laughter spilling out, only the wind's moan through ropes and the faint crack of dying embers. It looks like a moonlit graveyard, yet the quiet holds power, a disciplined thread binding men together. In this stillness, survival shifts from warmth to restraint, thoughts and fears locked inside silent minds. You curl into your cloak, letting the hush settle, and drift into a deeper, disciplined sleep, held firm by the iron frame of silence until dawn. Dawn creeps in, cold and gray, the fire outside reduced to ash. The dog has slipped away to scavenge, and your eyes catch a splash of color in the tent. A blanket, richly woven, draped over two men. Its fine threads and deep dyes mark it as no common soldier's gear. Its loot, likely torn from a village or a noble's baggage train. Chroniclers, like those of the 1420 sack of Basel, detail how soldiers scavenged bedding from conquered towns. Silken sheets, quilts, even church hangings found their way into muddy tents, transforming household goods into survival tools. Foot soldiers stuffed stolen mattresses with straw, while knights draped pavilions with altar cloths, as noted in accounts of the 100 Years' War. Imagine sleeping under fabric meant for sacred rites, now reeking of smoke, or a peasant's quilt, hastily patched, prized for blocking drafts. Historians debate the prevalence of this practice. Some, citing supply records, argue plunder was a key source of bedding, with linens taken alongside food. Others, noting chroniclers' focus on noble spoils, suggest such comforts were rare for common soldiers, who shivered under threadbare cloaks. Was looted bedding common, or a stroke of luck? The evidence, like the fabric, is patchy.
You trace the blanket's edge, its smoothness a stark contrast to your coarse cloak. The men beneath it sigh in their sleep, their faces softened, as if the stolen warmth has shaved years off their weariness. Others notice. One tugs his ragged cloak tighter, envy in his eyes. Another spits, muttering that loot never reaches the poor. yet no one moves to seize it. In this cold, stealing warmth feels like a betrayal of survival itself. The tense air carries the usual stench: smoke, sweat, damp wool, but the blanket's faint scent of clean dye hints at a life beyond the camp. You lie back, the dog's warmth a fading memory, and let the uneven breathing of your comrades lull you toward rest. Survival here isn't about comfort, but persistence. And this looted blanket, like the charms and the dog, is just another thread in the fragile weave holding you to dawn. The looted blanket, its origins lost to the mud, serves one purpose now: keeping soldiers alive. Its faint sweetness, perhaps lavender or rosewater from a forgotten chamber, clings stubbornly, a ghostly reminder of softer lives. The contrast is stark: fine fabric crumpled in filth, delicate threads shielding against brutal cold. Picture the tent at dawn's first light, a patchwork of survival. One man wrapped in stolen velvet, another curled on a coarse pelt, a third shivering beneath a threadbare cloak. Helmets and gambesons lie scattered, doubling as pillows or mattresses. The blanket, draped over two men, gleams like a jewel in the mire, a testament to plunder's strange role in sustaining armies. You close your eyes, imagining generations of soldiers sleeping under pilfered comforts, curtains, rugs, altar cloths, torn from homes and reborn as bedding. War doesn't just claim lives, it steals warmth and reshapes it. The blanket's reach eludes you, so you shift onto your straw, its dry crackle a small reassurance against encroaching damp. Your hand grazes the straw, its sharp ends pricking your skin, yet it's a barrier against the frozen earth. Chronicles from medieval campaigns, like those of the 1346 Crecy expedition, confirm straw's role as standard bedding. Bundles, cut from nearby fields or requisitioned in bulk during sieges, were spread beneath cloaks for insulation. Without it, the ground sapped heat, leaving men stiff or even frozen to the earth, as noted in accounts from the 1385 Scottish campaign.
A quirky practice. Some soldiers stuffed straw into sacks, sewing them shut for crude mattresses, while others layered rushes or bracken, chosen for their faint woodland scent when crushed. Archaeological finds from 14th-century French camps revealed traces of pine needles among straw, hinting at attempts to mask the camp's stench with nature's perfume. Imagine the irony: a tent reeking of smoke and sweat, yet your bedding releasing a fleeting forest aroma with each shift. Historians debate straw's effectiveness. Some, citing its ability to trap air, argue it offered real insulation when fresh, as supported by records of frequent straw requisitions. Others note that damp straw molded quickly, attracting vermin and losing its warmth, a problem detailed in chronicles of prolonged sieges. Was straw a true comfort or a fleeting illusion? It hinged on how often it could be replaced. Rarely enough in war's chaos. You stretch, feeling the straw's uneven texture, sharp stalks jabbing, others cushioning.
Men around you shift on their own dwindling piles, some reduced to mere handfuls. One plucks a stalk, rubbing it like a charm before tossing it aside.
The straw's scent, dry, dusty, faintly sweet, mingles with the tent's harsher odors, briefly evoking a barn's comfort. You think of horses bedded in deep straw, likely warmer than the men meant to ride them. Picture the tent, cloaks sprawled over straw piles, boots by the flap, gambesons atop rushes. In the thin morning light, the straw glows faintly golden, a rare brightness. Bits cling to cloaks, hair and beards, giving men a whiskered look. No one bothers brushing it off, it's camp life's mark, as much a part of you as the cold or the hunger. You settle back, letting the straw's faint crackle and the men's uneven breathing lull you toward another fragile rest. Endurance woven into every prickly stalk. You curl onto your side, cheek pressed against the brittle straw, its sharp stalks scratching but holding you just above the cold mud. It's no luxury, but it's enough, a thin line between you and the earth's bite. In this world of tense and freezing nights, enough is the closest kin to comfort.
Morning breaks harshly, not with warmth, but with a bone-deep cold that seems to have settled into your marrow overnight. Your breath clouds like smoke from a spent fire, and the tent walls glint with frost, canvas crackling under touch, seams traced in white crystals. Your cloak, damp from last night's leaks, is stiff as wood, bending grudgingly as you move. Chronicles from winter campaigns, like those of the 1347 siege of Calais, paint a vivid picture. Tents rimed with ice, ropes snapping under strain, armor frozen so solid it had to be pried apart. Horses stood frosted, their breath steaming like dragons. Surviving these mornings demanded not strength, but sheer will to force a rigid body into motion. A grimly amusing detail. Some woke with beards frozen into cloaks or boots hardened into upright shells, as recorded in accounts from 15th century Polish campaigns. Imagine shaking a boot like a block of oak, cursing as you held it to the fire to thaw its leather. Historians debate the toll of these frozen dawns. Some argue they paralyzed armies, frost-locked armor and impassable roads stalling campaigns, as seen in the stalled English advance during the 1417 Normandy campaign. Others contend soldiers pressed on, slowed but relentless, their endurance outlasting the ice. Were these mornings crippling, or just another misery to bear? The sources, scattered and inconsistent, offer no firm answer. You sit up, cloak crackling, fingers stiff as you fumble with frozen tunic ties. Around you, the tent stirs with groans and curses. One man shakes his straw, sending frost flakes flying. Another rubs his hands, muttering prayers through chattering teeth. Faces look gaunt, aged in the pale light, eyes squinting against a sun that offers no warmth. The camp smells shift in the frost. Smoke bites sharper, sweat sourness dulled, replaced by the clean sting of cold air laced with frozen wool's faint musk. Your lungs burn as you cough, the icy air raw in your throat.
Picture crawling to the tent flap. Outside, the ground shimmers silver, grass rimed with frost. Armor lies scattered, helmets and breastplates glinting like ice mirrors. Horses stamp, nostrils steaming. Men crouch over struggling fires, coaxing embers with trembling hands. The camp looks like a field of statues foraying into sluggish life. You stand, joints protesting, boots cracking as you move. Lifting a gauntlet, its metal bites your skin, more weapon than armor in this cold.
You blow on it, rub it with your cloak, desperate to dull its chill. Others fight similar battles, warming swords by the fire, wrestling stiff straps, shaking ice from cloaks. Words are scarce, the cold steals breath as it steals heat. The only sounds are ice snapping, breaths hissing, and groans as men haul themselves upright. Yet, amidst the misery, a soldier jests about statues waking, sparking faint laughter that ripples through the camp. A reminder that even in this frozen hell, life persists. You join the effort, coaxing a fire back to life, your hands trembling but determined, knowing survival lies not in warmth, but in the stubborn refusal to stop. A soldier desperate to thaw his boots sets them too close to the fire, and they smoke fiercely, drawing curses and jeers. The absurdity cuts through the silence, proof that laughter can survive chattering teeth. You pull your cloak tighter, staring at the pale sun climbing reluctantly, its light glinting off frost in patterns almost beautiful, if beauty could exist alongside numb fingers and stinging lungs. Frozen mornings stiffen armor and crack cloaks, but they can't halt the march. That bitter truth is the only warmth you carry as dawn unfolds. The order to march comes sharply, and you groan with the others, hauling your stiff body upright, cloak wrapped tight against the brittle air. Each step crunches frost, your joints creaking like rusted hinges. Chronicles, like those from the 1415 Agincourt campaign, describe soldiers rising from frozen nights to march, armor clanking, tents packed, wagons groaning forward. Men hobbled, limbs barely bending, yet commanders barked them into columns. Endurance meant not just surviving the night, but forcing a battered body to move at dawn.
A strange practice emerges. Some soldiers rubbed snow on their faces to jolt awake, as noted in 15th century German campaign accounts. The icy sting shocked blood into motion, a brutal but effective wake-up call. Imagine scooping snow, slapping it across your cheeks, eyes watering as your body lurches to life. Historians debate how soldiers endured these mornings. Some argue the rhythm of war, drums, shouts, and columns, propelled men forward, as seen in disciplined English armies. Others, citing stragglers in French records from the Hundred Years' War, suggest chaos often reigned, with commanders haranguing laggards. Was disciplined ironclad or frayed in practice? Likely both, varying by army and day. You shoulder your bundle, cloak and gambeson heavy, and join the shuffling boots. The fire smolders behind, the camp dog trots at the column's edge, and tents collapse, frost crackling as canvas folds. The air bites, sharp with cold earth and clinging smoke. Breath rises from the column, a fog of life. Your damp boots rub raw skin, each step a dull ache, mirrored by the limping men around you. Yet the rhythm builds, boots crunching, armor groaning, voices muttering, pulling you forward. Picture the march. Cloaks hunched against wind, spears bobbing like barren stalks, horses snorting, hooves striking frozen ground. Your stomach growls, your throat burns, but you walk. Absurdity creeps in. A soldier jests his legs are frozen logs, another quips logs burn warmer. Laughter ripples, weak but real. A dragging, off-key tune starts. Others join, weaving with the crunch of boots. The song isn't joyful, but it carries you. The landscape crawls by, frost-bitten trees, gray sky, pale earth. Your cloak flaps, edges jagged with ice. Comrades' faces are pale, lips cracked, eyes red from wind, yet jaws set.
The march is misery, but it's motion, and motion is survival. By the time the sun rises, weak and watery, you've walked hours, each step a stubborn refusal to stop.
Your body feels alien. Numb feet, aching shoulders, a back bowed under layers. But the numbness becomes its own shield. Pain fades into rhythm. Left foot, right foot, breath in, breath out. The march narrows to this cycle, almost meditative, pulling you forward when every instinct screams to collapse. This is the secret of medieval campaigns, surviving not just the freezing night, but the icy dawn, rising when you feel like ice inside, letting rhythm carry you. By midday, the landscape shifts, though the cold clings. That night, in your tent, you reflect on how survival varied across Europe's soldiers, each region's gear suited or unsuited to the cold. Chronicles, like those from 14th century Flanders, detail northern soldiers swathed in dense wool cloaks and felted mittens, snow sliding off like water. Southerners, used to Mediterranean warmth, struggled in linen tunics, freezing in northern sleet, as seen in accounts of Italian mercenaries during the 1420s Alpine campaigns. A quirky practice, Northerners stuffed boots with moss or wool, a shepherd's trick, while Italians layered multiple linen shirts under armor, each frost-heavy by dawn, but better than nothing. Historians debate whether these regional traditions mattered. Some argue they gave an edge. Scots and Norsemen better endured damp winters than Southerners, per records from the 1385 Scottish campaign. Others say war's misery equalized all. Wet wool or linen, mud erased differences. Did cultural gear shape survival, or was suffering universal? The question lingers, unanswered. Your cloak, thick and smoky, feels like a burden and a lifeline. You imagine others, bright red or green, fur-trimmed, some heirlooms woven with ancestral pride, others looted, their pasts erased when wrapped around shivering shoulders. In the tent, fabrics tell stories. A patched leather cloak, a blanket from a distant land, a soldier buried in layers like a walking mound. Smells map the diversity. Sour wool, grassy linen, musky fur, blending into a sensory Europe, squeezed into one tent. Picture the camp from above, tents dotting frost, each a patchwork of wool, linen, and stolen silks, a continent's traditions huddled against the cold.
The camp is a mosaic of fabrics, each stitch a reminder of home. Spanish soldiers tug light cloaks tight, their linen suited for warmer climes but feeble against frost. Others burrow in furs soft as velvet or make do with patched tunics, nationality erased on the battlefield but vivid in the night's cold embrace. Your cloak, heavy with smoke and itch, is both burden and shield, woven from traditions older than you. Survival tonight is not just wool and straw, but culture, choices of weavers and tailors shaping whether you freeze or endure. In this tent, Europe's patchwork wraps you, binding you to men from distant lands in a shared struggle. You close your eyes, the faint sweetness of a looted blanket mingling with sour wool, and drift into uneasy rest, warmed by the weight of heritage as much as cloth. The frost barely thaws when the next ordeal looms, a siege. Unlike the fleeting misery of a march, a siege is weeks or months of waiting in muddy trenches and leaking tents, cold pressing harder each day. Chronicles, like those from the 1340 siege of Tournai, describe tents collapsing under snow, soldiers dragging themselves from frozen canvas to face another damp night. There's no escape in motion, just endless waiting, hunger and weather waging war alongside enemies. Some improvisations were absurd. Wooden pallets raised inside tents, cloaks and hides draped like bunk beds to escape flooded ground, as noted in 15th century Burgundian records. Others piled straw knee-high, only for it to rot into a swampy mess after rain. The stench, mold, wet straw, sweat, and unwashed bodies became a toxic fog, with coughs echoing like a plague's drumbeat. Historians debate siege life's sustainability. Some, citing supply trains and communal fires, argue soldiers adapted, as seen in well-provisioned camps like those at Orleans in 1429. Others stress attrition, cold, filth, and disease as deadlier than arrows, per accounts of dysentery ravaging besiegers. Were tents shelters or symbols of routine in a lost cause? The truth splits, shaped by who survived to write.
Picture yourself in that tent. Rain hammering canvas, ropes creaking, poles bowing. Water seeps through patched seams, your cloak clammy, straw beneath a black, squelching sludge. The air chokes with acrid smoke, mold, and sour wool, fever spreading faster than fire. Outside, tents sag under frost, trenches brim with brackish water, soldiers bail futilely as more seeps in. Fires sputter on damp wood, horses huddle, ribs stark, breath steaming. Defenders on the walls watch, knowing time and weather fight for them. Yet men adapt, carving saintly symbols into poles, believing faith holds the canvas up, or crowding into larger tents, pooling heat and stories. One boasts of 3 dry nights under a looted fir. Another gripes he'd trade his sword for rot-free straw. Laughter, bitter but real, cuts through the drip of rain. You shift, the squelch of sludge beneath you, a reminder that survival here is not comfort, but defiance. Enduring the tense cage, the fever's threat, the cold's relentless grip, until the siege breaks, or you do. As you close your eyes, the wind's howl across the trenches underscores the relentless battle of siege life, not just against enemies, but against the elements. Each night in a leaking tent, breathing rot and mold, is an act of defiance. Survival isn't about victories, but the stubborn will to rise and endure another day in the icy grind. The cold of a northern winter is brutal, but desert nights bring a different treachery. By day the sun bakes you, sweat soaking your cloak. At night the warmth vanishes, leaving a biting chill. Crusader chronicles from the Levant and Moorish campaign accounts in Spain, like those from the 12th century siege of Lisbon, describe soldiers caught off guard by this shift. Cloaks, damp with daytime sweat, stiffened at night, trapping cold against skin. Fires faltered as desert winds scattered sparks, and wood, scarce and costly, was often traded at a premium. Soldiers improvised. Some dug shallow pits in the sand, curling inside with cloaks for insulation, as noted in 13th century Outremer records.
Others slept under shields, using them as windbreaks, while a few buried their feet in warm sand at dusk, hoping it held heat till dawn, a trick that rarely lasted. Historians debate these methods' effectiveness. Some point to accounts of men freezing in desert campaigns, like during the Third Crusade, suggesting improvisations often failed. Others argue the survival of armies in such climates, as at the 1177 Battle of Montgisard, proves their ingenuity worked to some degree, gambling with luck. The answer lies scattered like sand. Picture yourself in a tent, canvas straining against winds that turn icy. Sand creeps into seams, boots, even your teeth gritty and relentless. The stars above burn sharp,
their beauty mocking your shivers. Your cloak, stiff with dried sweat, reeks sourly, the dry air amplifying its pungence. Men cough, throats raw from dust, voices brittle. The desert's silence is eerie. No rustling trees, just the occasional jackal's bark or a night bird's cry. Footsteps crunch, tent ropes hiss, a coal pops defiantly. You pull your cloak tighter, but the cold slithers in, relentless. From above, the camp is a scattering of dark tents across pale dunes, glowing faintly from braziers of scavenged wood. Horses huddle, breath steaming, fires flicker, dwarfed by the desert's vastness, like fireflies lost in sand. Yet laughter pierces the misery. One soldier pines for snowy home, another jokes that lice die faster here, sparking brief chuckles. Humor, like cloaks and fires, stitches survival, holding despair at bay. You lie back, sand scratching your cheek, stars glaring above. The cold gnaws, but you whisper to yourself, dawn will come, and let that hope carry you into uneasy rest, where survival is woven from defiance as much as warmth.
The desert cycle, scorching days, freezing nights, mirrors the relentless rhythm of northern marches, each punishing in its own way. Yet soldiers endure, bodies marked by the toll of these campaigns. You wake one morning to a chorus of coughs, no longer just a stray sound, but a multiplying menace. Men hack and wheeze, chests rattling like gravel-filled drums. Your own throat, raw from smoke and frost, signals that sickness is as constant as your cloak. Chronicles from medieval campaigns, like those of the 13th century Baltic Crusades, reveal disease as a shadow companion to cold nights. Pneumonia, fevers, and frostbite spread swiftly, damp tents breeding illness faster than battle wounds. A commander at the 1347 siege of Calais lamented losing more men to coughs and ice than to swords. Cold, weakened bodies, inviting sickness to finish the work. Quirky remedies abounded, warm ale laced with garlic, believed to banish chills, hot stones wrapped in cloth pressed to chests, or onions stuffed in boots, their fumes thought to cleanse lungs. Imagine a tent thick with smoke, sweat, and onion stench, a desperate bid for health. Historians debate the toll of cold-induced illness, some citing high mortality in winter campaigns like the 1417 Normandy siege, argue disease was a primary killer. Others, noting soldiers' lifelong exposure to harsh conditions, suggest resilience was greater than assumed, with chronicles possibly exaggerating for dramatic effect. Were camps death traps, or did men adapt? The truth echoes in the coughs, unresolved. You lie back, the tent a symphony of sickness. A man hacks, spitting phlegm into straw. Another groans, clutching ribs that feel like blades. A sneeze erupts, followed by curses. Smoke and wool linger, now laced with fever-sweat's sour tang and the metallic hint of blood from cracked lips. The air feels dense, the tent a shrinking cage. Picture the camp. Men huddle, coughing into cloaks, faces pale in the brazier's glow. Some cling to fires, shaking despite the coals.
Horses stamp, sensing weakness. From above, tents and smoke look unchanged, but inside, illness gnaws silently. Yet humor persists. A coughing soldier jests, his breath could repel enemies.
Another wheezes a broken tune, sparking frail laughter. It doesn't heal, but softens despair's grip. You press your cloak to your mouth, hoping to filter the air, your chest aching with each breath. You tell yourself it's just smoke, not sickness, and close your eyes amid the relentless coughs. Sleep pulls you under, but your dreams conjure a cruel warmth, a glowing hearth, baking bread, a feather mattress, snatched away as you wake to the damp tent and frozen breath. Survival, you realize, isn't just about warmth, but outlasting illness long enough for dawn. The coughs persist, yet sleep claims you, a fragile defiance against the cold and creeping fever.
Dreams and visions wove through medieval soldiers' nights, as chroniclers like John Froissart and Crusader accounts often noted. Men dreamed of feasts so vivid they woke tasting phantom meat, or saw mothers, wives, or lovers whispering comfort through the cold. In brutal campaigns like the 13th century Baltic Crusades, these memories outshone reality, some swearing they smelled home hearths despite the reek of smoke and straw. Stranger still, folklore crept into records. Tales of sacred flames trailing armies, promising survival. Soldiers at the 1177 Battle of Montgisard spoke of undying fires in dreams, omens to some, fevered hallucinations to others, waking to frost-bitten toes despite imagined warmth. Scholars debate these accounts' weight. Some dismiss them as chroniclers' romantic flourishes meant to dramatize suffering. Others, citing psychological studies, argue they were survival mechanisms, the mind conjuring warmth and plenty to compensate for their absence. Were these dreams fact or metaphor? The haze of a smoky tent obscures the answer. You pull your cloak tighter, chasing a childhood hearth or a storm-sheltered quilt. But the damp wool, aching joints, and nearby coughs intrude. The tent stirs with murmured dreams. One man smacks his lips over imagined meat pies. Another sobs a woman's name. A third jolts awake, cursing a nightmare, as others groan. Dreams weave like smoke, each man's mind a fragile refuge. The air thickens with sweat, smoke, and straw's faint sweetness crushed under restless bodies. You breathe shallowly, hoping for a lingering taste of warmth. Picture the camp under moonlight, tents sprawling, each cradling men dreaming of non-existent fires, frost glittering outside. To an observer, it's misery. To those inside, it's survival, clinging to memories stronger than rags.
Survival, you realize, isn't just cloaks or fires. It's the will to endure when cold presses in. Chronicles, like those from the 1346 Crecy campaign, emphasize morale's equal weight to food or fuel. Commanders noted that armies with warm cloaks but broken spirits collapsed faster than those half-starved but defiant. Cold nights tested the mind as much as the body, each dawn a battle to believe survival was worth it. You close your eyes, chasing imagined hearths and laughter, your spirit floating briefly in memory's warmth. When you wake to the damp tent, you see men stirring, breathing, enduring. Their stubborn will, like yours, stitches survival from dreams and defiance, stronger than any cloak against the relentless cold. Medieval chronicles, like those from the 14th century Hundred Years' War, brim with tales of soldiers' mental defiance against the cold. Crude jokes sparked laughter until tears froze on cheeks. Childhood lullabies, sung in cracked voices, wove comfort into the night.
Dice rolled in straw or patterns scratched into frosted canvas turned misery into routine. These acts, small, stubborn rituals, stitched a mental fabric stronger than any cloak. Historians debate their impact. Some argue no song or charm could fend off frostbite, citing high mortality in winter campaigns like the 1417 Normandy siege. Others insist these psychological defenses were vital, enabling men to rise and march, as seen in accounts of resilient spirits during the 1346 Crecy campaign. Did survival hinge on cloaks or unyielding minds? The answer slips like smoke through tent seams. You pull your cloak tighter, not just against cold, but to shield your thoughts. The tent stirs. One man snores. Another mutters prayers. A third groans in sleep. Canvas creaks under the wind's assault, yet it holds. You breathe in smoke, damp wool, and sickness, each scent a proof of life. Picture the camp at dawn. Fires gutter, smoke thinning in pale light, horses steaming as they stamp. Men stumble from tents, hunched, red-eyed, armor frost-stiff. From afar, it's misery. Up close, a miracle of endurance. They slept half-frozen, awoke aching, yet rise. Lying on your straw, you see the true weapon against freezing. Not cloaks or fires, but stubbornness. Wills stronger than frost carried them through.
As you drift to sleep, imagine a medieval campfire fading to embers, tents sagging but shielding bodies beneath cloaks. Snores, coughs, and whispered prayers fill the smoky dark. Frost coats ropes outside, but inside men cling to comrades, memories, and scraps of warmth. Their story, surviving dripping canvas, crawling fleas, and icy gusts, reveals survival's essence. Not perfection, but finding enough. Enough warmth, laughter, belief to outlast the night. Picture yourself in that tent, wool scratching, canvas straining, smoke stinging. Feel the quiet defiance binding those men, their courage in closing eyes and trusting dawn. Now, beneath your own blankets, let your breathing slow. The cold and noise belong to another time. You're safe, sinking into softness, enduring like those soldiers, not in comfort, but in the stubborn will to meet morning. Sleep, knowing you've already survived the hardest night.